Might have just break my heart. Yeah, totally. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to call to order the May 5th, 2022 meeting of the Board of Directors of the Thompson-Nicola Regional District. In terms of Chair's announcement, I can say that you're welcome to our May 5th, 2022 board meeting. The Chair acknowledges that we connect, the TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nation communities across our vast regional district, and today are located on the Tecumseh territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with Tecumseh Secwepemc and respect the territory and land on which we gather today. We would welcome today Alternate Director Andrea Inwards, attending on behalf of Director Laird, but I don't see her. So she's AWOL. And we also welcome our new Film Commissioner, Gareth Smith, who is attending today's meeting. Gareth, we're looking forward to working with you. And I think I said Gareth Smith, and I meant to say Gareth Smart. And Gareth, if you're half as smart as the departing Film Commissioner, we will be in good hands indeed. The Film Commissioner attended SILGA on a panel regarding the film industry with the Okanagan and Shuswap Film Commissioners, as well as with Peter Cameron Inglis, owner of Mastermind Studios. The movie of the week, Killer Podcast, filmed for 12 days in the region, and it has wrapped. It is estimated they spent more than $750,000 in the local economy. On a more sober note, the Directors Guild of Canada, BC branch is on strike, which negatively affects production managers, location scouts. Many productions are currently filming due to a safe harbor agreement, but no new productions will be started until the strike is resolved. The week of May 16th is Creative Industries Week. The Film Commissioners will be attending marketing and networking in Victoria. The Thompson-Nicola Regional Library is pleased to announce that renovations to the Ashcroft Library will commence shortly. The last day of operations is Saturday, May 21st, with an anticipated reopening in mid-July. The Ashcroft Library modernization will feature the TNRL's first service extender, increasing hours by 100%, a large children's area, updated technology, and increased seating. During the closure period, patrons will be redirected to the Cache Creek Library for service. Andrea, we welcomed you here a few minutes ago, okay? So in terms of upcoming meetings and events, we have on the 18th of May, Policy Review Committee meeting. Also on the 18th of May, Invasive Plant Management Committee. On the 19th, our Emergency Protective Services Committee meets. And on May 19th as well, we have a regular board meeting. Today in your blue folders, you will find TNRD building permit activity highlights for April 2022. So with that behind us, are there any additions to or deletions from the agenda? Ms. Campbell.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. We've had to update the agenda with a late item under Section 6 Bylaws.
Yes, thank you. And I did receive an updated copy. Okay, we have minutes from the regular board meeting of April 21st, 2022, and a recommendation.
So moved.
Second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. That brings us to delegations. And we have Mr. Brent Ashby from KPMG to give us a presentation regarding the audit report and financial statements for 2021.
Thank you, Chair Gillis and directors. Pleasure to be here today. I'm going to walk you through the 2021 consolidated financial statements of the TNRD. These statements have we've gone through in more detail with the audit committee in an April meeting, but I will go through the highlights of the 2021 financial statements and make some comments on the results of operations for 2021.
Just
So
a
if you-
moment, Mr. Ashby, can somebody maybe turn the lights down a bit? I think it's going to be hard for people to read what's on the screen.
Thank you. If you could move to the right past the table of contents into the management's responsibility for the financial statements. I think it's important sometimes there's a couple documents at the front of the financial statements, which I think are important to point out, is that in this document basically outlines management's responsibilities for the financial statements. It basically says that they're responsible for selecting the appropriate accounting policies, that they are responsible for designing and maintaining accounting systems and internal controls to provide reliable information and preparing the financial statements. And it also states that the board is responsible for overseeing management's in the performance of its financial reporting and for appointing the external auditors to audit the financial statements. Next, we go into the independent auditors report, and that's really the document that we provide on your financial statements and in providing our audit results and our opinion on the financial statements. And basically, right at the start of the independent auditors report is our opinion on the financial statements. And it says we provided an unqualified opinion on the consolidated financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2021, meaning the financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects with Canadian public sector accounting standards. And it goes on from there to provide our basis for opinion, that we've conducted our audit in accordance with Canadian auditing standards, that we've obtained sufficient audit evidence in providing our opinion on the financial statements. It also reiterates management's responsibility for the financial statements. And then our auditor's responsibility as well in terms of making sure we've obtained reasonable assurance on whether the financial statements as a whole are free from material misstatements, whether due to fraud or error, and that if there are any misstatements, they would be not expected to impact users of the financial statements. So we set a materiality level when we go through our audit, and we audit to that, and that focuses our planning and helps us evaluate any misstatements that we may have in our audit. We also assess where there might be more significant risk areas, and we respond to those risks in our audit plan, and ultimately evaluate also the appropriateness of accounting policies that's used by management and the disclosures made in the financial statements. And lastly, we communicate any significant findings to the audit committee, which we've done in the April meeting. And we've dated our report today, May the 5th. So going past then the financial statements into the actual results. So on the next page is the consolidated statement of financial position, which outlines your financial assets, liabilities, non-financial assets, and accumulated surplus for both the December 31st, 2021 balances, and in the comparative column, the December 31st, 2020 balances. So just hitting some of the highlights, and their financial assets have gone up. They're just over $57 million at the end of the year, comprising about $49 million in cash and cash equivalents. And so that would be cash in the bank account plus about $11.5 million that's in money market funds at the end of the year. And also accounts receivable, which you could see has gone up over last year. And I'm going to mention this probably numerous times, but obviously the fire and flood situation in 2021 has had a major impact on your financial results, your financial statements for the 2021 fiscal year. And the bulk of that increase in accounts receivable is really the outstanding amounts receivable from the province for emergency operations related to running the emergency operations in the floods that happened in the fall. And so about 4.8 of that 7.9 million is outstanding from the province. In terms of liabilities, the same story there in accounts payable and accrued liabilities. It's up over last year by approximately $3 million. And a lot of that is increased supplier and payables with respect to the floods that happened in November. In terms of other liabilities, deferred revenue is up from about 7.2 to 9.4 million. And a lot of that is unspent community works funding, gas tax funds. And also there is a grant as well for the Pritchard water system that is still unspent and will be utilized in the next fiscal year. In terms of debt, long-term debts, no new loans were taken out in 2021. You continue to have on the long-term debt side about 11 loans with Municipal Finance Authority. Average borrowing rate is 2.73%. In terms of other significant liabilities would be your landfill remediation liability, and that is an estimate of your future costs of closing and the post-closure care costs of the 5 landfills within the Tnrd, 3 that are closed already that have ongoing costs and the 2 that are currently in operation. And the liability has gone up from about 7.8 million to 8 million in the current year. So your total liabilities have gone from 20.4 million up to 25.6 million, and your net financial assets have increased by about $600,000 to 31.4 million. Non-financial assets are mainly your tangible capital assets, your infrastructure, buildings, equipment utilized by the Tnrd. Additions in the current year were about 5.6 million in terms of capital spending. Includes the Eco Depot for Cache Creek, water meters, library books, and other equipment that was acquired in 2021. And your accumulated surplus has gone up from 85.1 million to 87.4 million. And that includes about 19.5 million that's in operating reserves and another 5.6 million that's in capital reserves. And all of those are outlined in the notes and statements as the specifics of those reserves. If we flip to the next page, then the consolidated statement of operations. You can see that in 2021, your revenues exceeded just over $40 million, 40.3, almost 40.4 million, as compared with 35.5 million the prior year. A lot of that change is in the government transfers and other grants line. Taxation revenue, actually, you could see tax requisition was down about $400,000 from last year. Government transfers and other grants went from about 5.5 million to about 9.8 million. And a lot of that being the emergency management grants, about 5.3 million of that number. Also about 1.1 million for community works grants in that, included within that 9.8 million government transfers. User charges, so sale of services, that was increased over the prior year. Some additional revenues for building permits, tipping fees, and recycling fees. All of those are up over the prior year. In terms of other revenue of 1.4 million as compared with 865,000 the year before, there was a contribution to the Pritchard water system as well as some Trans Mountain project revenues in 2021. There is a loss on disposal of tangible capital assets, and that relates to the Lytton Library and the leasehold improvements there that was destroyed in the fire that happened at the end of June. So total revenue, as I said, is just about 40.4 million. Expenses are up as well, and mainly in the areas you would expect in protective services, which increased from about 3.85 million to just about 9.1 million. The fire and floods costs of 2021 obviously were significant. You see some decrease in environmental health services was from about 12.2 to about $11 million. A lot of that has to do with a non-cash item, which is I mentioned the landfill remediation liability and the amount that's charged there, depending on the assumptions and estimates that go into that number. The amount charged to the expenditure was about $200,000 this year, which was less than about the 1.2 million the prior year. Recreation and culture, there was some decline in expenses in 2020 with the operations of the library as a result of closures during that time period. So those costs have come back up with cut staffing, etc., that may not have been present in 2020. Other line items were fairly similar, some increase in general government, you had the cost of professional fees and the forensic audit that occurred in 2021. So total expenses were 38.1 million, up about 5 million from last year, pretty consistent with the increase in revenue for the year, leaving you with an annual surplus of 2,287,000 compared with 2,410,000 in 2020. The rest of the financial statements, I'm just going to make a few comments. There's no changes in the accounting policies in 2021. You'll see that in your notes of the financial statements, and obviously those are an integral part of the financial statements. There's also some more details on account balances and other significant disclosures. And the last schedule as well, if you want to just maybe flip to the last page. And I know this was something that the government requires, is the COVID restart grant and how you've spent those funds. And I just wanted to highlight the fact that this additional schedule is there in your financial statements again this year. And essentially that you had 947,000 of unspent COVID restart grant monies last year. You received another 429,000 in the current year. And you had about 1.2 million unspent at the end of the year. And you've basically allocated those funds into your 2022 budget and how you're allocating those. So that's my comment. I'll maybe stop there. I want to just thank management and staff for all their cooperation and assistance in getting through the audit this year. And if there's any question, I'll pause there.
Does anyone have a question for Mr. Ashby? Director Schaefer.
I'd just like to ask a couple questions. Do you certify your audits, or do they not do that anymore? Like
What
you certify what your work?
we sign the audit report? Yes, so that's certifying. Yes.
And can you tell me how you would find discrepancies if there is any?
How we
Find any
define-
discrepancies if there is any?
in what, in the audit
In the
misstatements?
audits?
How we find them? So we carry out a lot, we take sample testing, we look at expenses, revenues, and agree them to supporting documentation. So we do focus obviously on areas where we think there'll be a higher risk of a material misstatement. So in terms of a financial statement audit, we're auditing to in the current year, a materiality level of $800,000. So we're focused on those larger account balances. And if we have any misstatements, it might be perhaps, for an example, if we found an invoice that came in late when we're doing our audit, it hadn't been recorded in your financial statements, we put that either management, we identify that to management posts the adjustment in the financial statements, or they say it's not material and it is an item that we should just leave on our unadjusted schedule, which we're required to report to your audit committee if we have items that are not recorded that we find are misstatements in the audit. And we do, if they're significant enough to report, we report those to the audit committee, and they would have received a schedule of any misstatements, both that get corrected into your accounts at year end or that remain uncorrected.
Sorry, Director Stamer.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation. On this page that talks about the facilities loan on the library that burnt down in Lytton, I'm just trying to understand when it talks about the scheduled payments on this loan continue or expected to be offset fully by insurance proceeds. That's to say that everything was fully insured and that structure doesn't change. Is that what that means?
But at year end, there hadn't been any insurance that had been approved, as our understanding. And so the loan payment would continue on the debt, but there was an expectation that would be insurance to recover the assets that were lost.
So then what, so you answered my question that it doesn't change what the loan payments are.
No, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for Mr. Ashby? I see no hands up on the screen and no hands up here. Thanks ever so much, Mr. Ashby,
Thank you
for
very
coming
much.
and updating us on that. That takes us to Number 6, bylaws, 6.1 amendment to bylaw 2774. There are 2 recommendations.
Move one.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Is anyone opposed? None opposed. That's carried. Recommendation 2 moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. That brings us to reports. And our CAO has a verbal report to begin with.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. I have nothing to update the board on, other than I would like to get Mr. Ray just to do a quick progress report on our BDO forensic audit.
Mr. Ray?
Thank you, Chair. So just wanted to note a couple of the things we've been working on as a result of those recommendations. As you'll recall, the recommendations suggest amending and or developing new policies, especially focused around expenses and expense claims, as well as updates to the procurement and contract practices. And so that's what we've been focusing on. At the May Policy Committee meeting, we expect to bring forward some revised or new policies. Namely, there's a meal and travel expense policy related to the expenses for the board. It would be a board policy. And then related to that, there'd be a separate meal and travel expense policy. It would be administrative policy that would apply to staff. So we're working on those in conjunction with each other. There's also, in terms of connected to expenses, I had previously mentioned that we were going to be preparing a quarterly report that would list out sort of like the statement of financial information report we usually put out once a year, but it would be on a quarterly basis. And it would be a summary of board expenses for each quarter, as well as senior management. So that's been drafted and it's under final review, and expect that to be up on our website in the next few days for the first quarter of 2022. And we'll make sure to send out notification to all of you when it's on the website, so you'll be able to go and have a look. Work also continues on the procurement policy and delegation of authority bylaw updates. That's a rather large, major undertaking, and we want to make sure we do it right. So we're taking the time to make sure it's all done properly, but the progress is being made. Again, back to the website for ease of access, we're creating a new tab on the website on the first landing page that will be under the heading of accountability, and all of the documents that we're posting around the recommendations from the forensic audit and the progress and so on is all going to be more easily found under that accountability tab. So that'll be a slight change to the website. In other news, we've rolled out the new code of conduct and conflict of interest policies, communicated it to all the employees, and we're currently undertaking training with each of the departments to make sure they fully understand the new policies. So that's being done sort of on a department by department basis. We're making our way through that. There's going to be a virtual training session that will be recorded so that as new employees are hired or as things need to be refreshed, we can have them review it instead of having to always have it being done in person every time someone new gets hired. It's just more timely that way. And there's an annual sign-off declaration of conflict of interests that we're currently getting all employees to sign. We expect that to be done before the June 24th. We're drafting the annual CAO performance review process for review by the board within the next month or so. We're reviewing updates to the Emergency Operations Center compensation policy and actively researching disclosure policy or whistleblower policy that we expect to present this summer. That's basically everything I have on my list.
Thanks, Mr. Ray. Sorry. Director Singh, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Gillis. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I appreciate that very much, Mr. Ray, the update. I think it's really good progress here. A couple of us received an email a while back from the chair of the Real District of East Kootenay. I guess in East Kootenay, what they do is they have a check register that they actually monthly or every couple of months, they actually publish it in a meeting at the board level. And then the board has a chance to also ask questions, or I can forward you the email for sure. It may be something that we could consider, as kind of instead of posting on the website, actually having it come to a board meeting where there's an opportunity for us to kind of question anything that we want to question if that's something the board has an appetite for. So I'll forward you that email, and I'd like to, just see what you think about that. I don't want to ask you that for a comment right now because you haven't seen the email, but I'll send it to you, and then maybe we can see what you think.
Certainly. I mean, I guess I could just mention that we have been sending out checklistings to the board for review. It's just not as part of a board meeting agenda.
Yeah, I guess the transparency towards the public. I mean, so we have transparency obviously towards the board, but if we do it in a more formal way with actually a report to a board meeting, obviously, then it becomes, it becomes more transparent even than it is now. So I think that might be a good way. So I'll send an email to you for your thoughts, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, certainly. And I guess the other response I'd have to that is just consider we're looking at receiving some updates from Ms. Campbell around our committee structure. And we're looking at a finance committee, and that might be the more appropriate venue than a sort of general board meeting.
Thank you. Did I see a hand raised, Director Rothenberger?
Thanks, Chair. With respect to travel policies, I think it may have been at our most recent policy committee meeting, I asked about whether we should think about some kind of policy with respect to hotel accommodation. And I don't think it was captured in a motion per se, but I just wondered if you have put any more thought into that. I had thought last night that if we go in that direction, we should maybe look at it possibly a two-tiered guideline, similar to what we do for per diems for meals. Because at the coast, of course, the expenses are much higher than the rest of the province. So we try to accommodate that with two different rates. And I wondered if you have in your review whether you've looked at hotels any further, and whether a two-tier policy might be worth thinking about.
I haven't done any specific work on that yet, but I don't know. Ms. Campbell's been looking at it as part of her review.
Yeah, through the chair to Director Rothenberger, we've been looking at building in some language around that. So for example, when we travel as staff, we always try and book somewhere where there's a government rate. Oftentimes, if the board or staff are attending a conference, there's a conference rate offered with that. I don't think we would set a particular limit. I think that would be challenging. I think we would just want to provide some limitations and guidelines about, the type, not the type, but I mean, the cost. So some hotels are obviously a lot more expensive than others. So just looking at sort of best value for the taxpayer when we're booking hotels.
Yeah, I agree that it's tricky, particularly for conferences, when you have official conference hotels who are giving a rate and others aren't, and then you've got the government rate and the seasonal rate, which can be much different, and what the hotel rooms these days are, especially in a city like Vancouver or Toronto or anywhere, that you're looking at several $100s as the lowest you can possibly get. And it would be hard to put maximums on that because you're kind of at the mercy of what's available many times. But I think it would really be good to have some kind of guidelines that say, this is our approach to hotel accommodation. we will look for the most economical within, reason for a particular event or whatever. Leave that with you. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Mr. Ray? Director Brown?
I didn't really have a question for Mr. Ray, but in response to the hotel accommodation, there has to be some level of convenience for those of us that do attend conferences. And I certainly don't want to be 20 blocks down the road and expected to walk, or the idea of taking a taxi, which would make it that much higher than the low rate anyway. So I think there's a lot more than just the cost of a hotel to take into consideration. I just wanted to make sure that that part was out there.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments respecting Mr. Ray's presentation? I see none. So thank you, Mr. Ray, for that. Thank you, Mr. Hildebrand, for that. That was your CAO's verbal report. Nice move. So that brings us to 7.1.2, which is the audited financial statements. There is a recommendation.
Move the recommendation.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Director Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The auditor referenced it earlier in his presentation, but we did have a very robust discussion at the audit committee under Chair Al Rain and Director Quinn and myself, and talked about a number of issues, including materiality. That's the threshold below which it's inconsequential to the overall bookkeeping for them to look at. We talked about testing of certain procedures within the audit process and randomness of that. And we talked about the independence of the auditors themselves, and they had done some additional work this year, and the audit committee was satisfied and felt that we wanted to recommend it to the board today.
Thanks, Director Christian. Is there any further discussion with respect to the recommendation? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? See no one opposed, it's carried. We're looking for direction on the Lytton Library and assistance to the Village of Lytton. There is a report from the Chief Financial Officer dated May the 5th. And they're looking for board direction on assistance to the Village of Lytton following the loss of the Lytton Library, which was the subject of earlier question by Director Stamer. So I think I'll entertain the recommendation, and then perhaps Mr. Ray can answer some questions. So there is a recommendation. Moved. Seconded. So there will be discussion, and maybe we could start with Mr. Ray.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. So I guess I'll start by saying that we were contacted by the insurance adjuster who's looking after this claim on behalf of the Tnrd, and he's also looking after the Village of Lytton's claim. And he's been doing work to determine what the replacement value would be and what our eventual insurance payout will be and so forth. And he proposed that there were some costs that the village was likely looking to incur for office space that would extend past the period at which MIA is in a position to cover, but that the Tnrd had the option. There was some coverage under our insurance policy that could potentially be tapped into to provide assistance to the village in covering those costs. However, he also made it clear that to the best of his understanding, we would only be able to access those particular parts of the insurance coverage if we intended to actually rebuild the building that was lost. And so CAO Hildebrandt and I spoke about it, and it seemed like the kind of thing that we needed to bring in front of the board for direction, because we haven't actually had a discussion and direction from the board about what the intent going forward is. And there's not a lot of information currently available on which to base a decision, but we wanted to at least bring this matter in front of the board and give you the opportunity to consider it.
Thank you. So there are a number of questions. Director Stamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple right off the top, I guess. One to Mr. Ray, I would think that the reason they had 18 months was the expectation is it would be rebuilt in that period of time. So I guess the question would be to the mayor, if what their timeline is on that. And number two, on the insurance part of it, where is it a replacement insurance? Knowing now what's happening with our costing, are you suggesting that if we did rebuild, even if we did a split similar to what we've done previously, that we're going to be looking at additional monies to rebuild that same facility?
Mr. Ray.
Yeah, so that's part of the information I don't exactly have. So my understanding is, and just for a bit of background, the building itself was built around 2000, 2001. The Tnrd financed the building under a 25-year financing. And partway through that, the way it was being financed by MIA was changed due to decisions made at MIA's level. And at that time, the title of the building transferred to the Tnrd. And so as it stood when the building was destroyed, Tnrd is the sole owner on title. So it's our insurance that covered the building itself, and then we respectively had insurance over the contents. In terms of rebuilding, I've been working under the assumption that that is the plan, and that the insurance, to the best of my knowledge, would cover the rebuilding cost, the replacement value. So it's not so much that we are looking at facing a significant cost over and above what the insurance proceeds would be on the rebuilding. It's more the case that for the village to move forward with some of its plans and for us to be able to assist them through our insurance policy, they're saying to access those benefits, we would only be able to access them if we intend to rebuild the building. And we haven't received direction from the board on that yet.
Okay, Director Rothenberger.
I look forward to hearing what Director Holderman has to say on this, but if I'm understanding the report, well, I guess my question is, what possible reasons would there be not to rebuild the building or replace it? The only one I can think of is if the whole town isn't rebuilt. And so it's kind of like an easy question to answer in my view. Yes, we give direction that we rebuild. Correct? That's the question.
That is the question.
Yeah, thanks.
And thank you for that comment, Director Rothenberger. Director Rice.
Thank you, Chair. And to echo.
Sorry,
yeah,
Mr. Chair. Sorry, could we have Director Bolderman speak? I think he has some comments.
Well, I represent that area also. and
I
some
do have him on the
constituents.
list, Director
So-
O'Reilly, and I was proceeding through the list in the order that people raised their hands.
And-
Director Rice.
Yes, and I have quite a few constituents that are highly impacted that I consider the village of Lytton. So let's not draw boundaries here anyways, as far as that goes. We're all a community and stuff. And part of the challenges is, of course, I've talked to Doug a number of times, and I talked with Scott recently about this. And part of the big issue is simply not getting answers from the province. I've been trying to get answers. Everybody's trying to get answers. We're not getting answers around critical questions like time frame, scope of the project. We're not getting answers around priorities, what's be given priorities and stuff like that. And when you're not getting answers from the province about those, it's sort of hard to move forward with any kind of certainty. And that's where the staff is struggling, and I'm also struggling. And that's why it's being brought before the board today, which I think is good. I think there's no question that a rebuild of that, it shouldn't even be on the table and stuff like that. But because of the lack of progress in over 10 months now on the rebuild, and the lack of answers in over 10 months on the rebuild. The province has put this board and the community of Lytton and its surroundings in a real precarious situation of high anxiety and wanting answers, and they simply are not forthcoming. And when I asked Scott about it, our CAO about it and stuff, he says he's having a real difficult time getting them also. So if our CEO can't get answers from the province, I don't know who can. So I just, because of this window of the indemnity of only being 8 months away, and at that point, we'll have this penalty kicked in where we're going to be paying more. I think the urgency here is important too, that we give direction to staff to move forward with that, because that deadline, like I said, is fastly approaching in 8 months. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Rice. Director Polderman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Village of Lytton has every intention to rebuild the village office. The office, I believe, was on a lease to own basis, and I believe, unfortunately for the TNRD, that we were a year to 2 years away from actually owning the building. That said, my discussions with fellow councillors and staff is that a rebuilt building may not look exactly the way the old building was. And our intention, of course, would be that our wishes would be paid for by, or additional wishes would be paid for by the village. So that's sort of where we're at on the, on the village office and that. The province has provided funding for a temporary village office, and the project coordinator is in the process right now of securing a village office, a temporary village office. And while a number of you here all think that progress isn't being made, progress is being made. I understand it's slow, but when you look at the complexity of the situation, we've had very little insurance cooperation. We are moving forward, and that's sort of where it stands. And I would hope that the board would be patient as new designs. We expect that new designs will be drawn up, and the village and the TNRD will have to figure out who owes what on a new building. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Polderman. I'm a little puzzled now. Excuse me. Are you suggesting that the village, you've said the village fully intends to build a new village office, and are you suggesting that that may indeed be a freestanding structure independent of the library and independent of the TNRD?
No, but the village office could have a second floor to it.
Okay, so it would still be in conjunction with the library.
At the moment, that is the intention.
Okay, thank you. I have Director Elliott, Director Quinn, Director Roden, and then Director Rothenberger again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doug, do we have we have some kind of a lease payback, something or other with Clinton? And I mean, I know that we have always owned, or not always, but we now own our libraries. So why would there be an issue about rebuilding this one? I mean, to me, it's an obvious choice to get it up and running so that whatever happens within that village, that's what they've got. And the follow-up of the insurance and all of those kind of things will fall into place once we make a decision about that.
Mr. Ray?
That's the assumption we've been working under, is that we would substantially rebuild what was lost and working with the village to make sure their needs are met. And, you know, if there are changes, improvements to the design that might incur extra costs, that would be worked out, whether it be the village or through grant assistance to, you know, have it be more environmentally sound or whatever. But the working assumption staff have been taking is that we were working towards a rebuild. It's more just this question of accessing certain insurance benefits that would assist the village, but it would have to be the Tnrd accessing it, that brought the question to the fore to make sure we're not just working on an assumption, but that the board endorses that direction so that we're following proper procedure.
Thanks, Mr. Ray. Director Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you. Two questions. The paragraph, the village is listed as facing significant costs, and it talks about an 18-month indemnity. I understand in Lytton, there's a number of archaeological concerns, which may be causing some of the delays. I think that's correct. If that's true, can that be extended? Because that's not a known factor.
Yeah, that would be a question I'd have to follow up with the insurance adjuster on and with MIA, but 18 months is the figure he provided to me.
Okay, thank you. A second question is you referred to replacement costs. Do those replacement costs encompass changes to the new, whatever's coming down the pipe on the building code? We saw step 2, 3, 4, and 5 last week, last meeting. How does that play into it, and are we covered? And supplement to that is, are all our other buildings covered the same way? Thank you.
It's a good question, one that I probably need to do more research on because I haven't really looked at it. In terms of the coverage, it's for replacement of the asset. I know that the insurance adjuster who's doing the work on our behalf has been doing quite a bit of work since last summer to determine, you know, what the cost of rebuilding essentially what we had before would be. He's been given designs of the previous building, and he's been, to my knowledge, working with contractors to establish, you know, cost to rebuild. The question would really come in terms of how much of a change that we might dictate. But I'm not really sure how changes in the you know, building code and so on might affect it. We can certainly follow up on that and get more information.
Thanks, Mr. Ray.
Supplementary, if my house burned down, I've got replacement costs. There's a little thing in there that it matches that. There's a little clause in there that says any zoning changes that might be needed or changes in building code are covered. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Roden.
Thank you. Just first of all, a question. Mr. Ray, you said that it was something to do with the financing authority, that the title of the building was solely under the name of the Tnrd. Is that correct?
Yeah, when the original building was built, it was financed through what's called a capital lease. And with the capital lease, we don't actually get title to the building until all of the financing's been paid off. And that still, there's about 4 years of financing left to go. However, in 2016, MFA, Municipal Finance Authority, discontinued its capital lease program. And so they transitioned it into a separate form of financing that's more like a straight ahead loan. So we're still making monthly debt payments to MFA. But at that time, because of the change in the format of the loan, they actually did title transfer to us. And where at the outset of the financing, Tnrd was the sole name on the lease. But It's absolutely true that the village has been paying a portion of those payments. They've been paying the TNRD, the portion, and the TNRD has been paying MFA the full amount. But because of the way it was set up, it was solely our name put on title. The intent was, as soon as the financing was finalized, that the building would be stratified and the ownership would be separated between the village and the TNRD. It just happened that at the time that the fire occurred, TNRD was still the sole name on title.
So in essence, then it is the TNRD's decision whether or not to rebuild the building. And if the TNRD did decide to rebuild the building on somewhat the same basis as before, that portion of it would be used by the Village of Lytton and a portion of it would be used by the TNRL, then we would presumably come to an arrangement with the Village of Lytton that they would pay a proportion of that cost based, I assume, on what the formula was in place before.
Yes, I believe you're correct. The intent was, as Lytton's been paying into the financing for the last 20 years, that's essentially a purchase of equity in the building. So once all of the debt was paid off, the intent was to stratify the building. They would not be required to make an additional payment because they've already been paying all along. It would just be formalizing the ownership structure. And as I said, that was where things stood when the fire occurred.
Right. So would a next step be for the TNRD to sit down formally with the Village of Lytton to discuss what precisely both partners want to see in a building going forward, so that then we are better able to make a decision on this?
That would be my expectation, and we've been having those discussions. I don't know if Mr. Hildebrand wants to jump in, but again, it was just this question being brought forward about accessing this insurance benefit that kind of brought the question to the fore, because clearly we need to make sure we have direction from the board as a whole, rather than taking on, making assumptions and taking on discussions and doing a lot of work without specific direction from the board to do so.
Thank you. I have Director Rothenberger, Director Steamer, and Director Polderman. Mr. Hildebrand, okay. Director Rothenberger.
Yeah, the recommendation is simply that the board provide direction to staff, but it doesn't say what that direction would be. So I'm wondering if an amendment would be appropriate to the effect that the board directs staff to proceed with insurance claim decisions related to loss of the Lytton Library and Civic Hall building based on their replacement, something like that. So that's.
Yeah, I think that would have to say, I open to suggestions here, Ms. Campbell. But I think that what we would have to say is that the board direct staff to continue on the basis or on the understanding that we will be replacing the building. That's the main question, is it not?
That's correct, Chair, that we would proceed on the basis that we would proceed with accessing this insurance benefit on the basis that the TNRD does intend to rebuild.
Just as I said, Mr. Chair, that's my amendment.
Okay. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all in favor? Oh, I'm sorry, Director Rain, did you wish to speak to the amendment?
No, I just wanted to say, perhaps we should add under the terms and conditions of the original agreement.
Ms. Campbell?
Just to provide some clarity to the board, so all we need is direction from the board that we intend to rebuild in order to access this business interruption coverage, because we currently own on title the building that's been lost. We can, through our coverage with MIABC, access business interruption coverage, which we can then use to give to Lytton to assist them with leasing a temporary buildings and structures until it's rebuilt. So really, it's only, all we're talking about right now is just confirming with MIA that yes, we do intend to rebuild so that we can access this business interruption coverage.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. And so I get, oh, and that's okay with Director Rain. So is there any further discussion on the amendment? I see none. All in favor? Is anyone opposed? Seeing none, the amendment carries. Now, is there any further discussion on the recommendation as amended? Director Stamer?
Sorry, not on the, just a question on the original, so not on the amendment, but just on the.
Okay, thank you. Director Polderman, has your question been addressed?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question was asked about rebuilding, whether you rebuild back to what you had as opposed to what the building code calls for. Now, your insurance policy will say that the insurance companies build back to the building bylaw at the time of the fire. However, the province's building code trumps your building bylaw, and whatever building you do has to meet the building code of British Columbia. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Stamer?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I know this isn't really off topic, but just a quick question I had. Who owns the property that the building is on? And is there, to Mr. Ray, if there's any other costs that are associated with the rebuild, whether there's remediation, those kinds of things, is that covered by insurance as well?
Mr. Ray?
To the best of my knowledge, yes, we own the land that the building was sitting on, and that remediation and so on, a lot of that work's already been taking place. They've cleared the property of the previous debris. It's the similar process that all the other properties are going through. There's a lot of questions still to be determined as we go down this path in terms of, do you rebuild on the exact same site? Is that going to meet all of the needs, that may be determined as we proceed? There could be things like that come forward, but I think the main purpose of bringing this forward today, as Ms. Campbell said, was to get direction from the board to say, yes, we do intend to rebuild, and that we should be able to, based on that, access these insurance benefits. There's a lot of other questions still to be looked into before we determine exactly what the new building is going to look like, where all the funding is going to come from.
I'm sorry, I can understand that, Director Ray, and it seems to me that we're getting off topic here. There's going to be all kinds of complications, it seems to me, if there are changes in design and so on and so forth, and we're covered for what we used to own, and what we're proposing becomes something altogether different. And those are things that are going to have to be settled through negotiations, as I understand it, between the TNRD and the Village of Lytton. And those negotiations have already begun and they're ongoing. Am I correct in that?
Yes, discussions have taken place for sure.
Thank you. Director Polderman.
The cost of all public buildings, the remediation work has all been covered by the province, so we shouldn't see any bills to clean up, the pool, the library, the village office, public works. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Polderman. Is there any further discussion on the motion as amended? Director Roden.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to clarify what would happen, for example, if somewhere down the road, the TNRD having committed to rebuilding so that we can access these funds on behalf of the Village of Lytton, plans change on the part of someone involved, and it's no longer something that is deemed that is going to happen. If the Village of Lytton makes other arrangements, for example, are we committed now to, would we be committed absolutely to rebuilding something, even if it is, say, just to house the library?
Mr. Ray.
Yeah, and I don't have a definitive answer to that. The question that was put to me was, would you be willing to access these benefits, but they can only be accessed if the TNRD intends to rebuild? my assumption would be, and I can confirm this, there would be, if we access the benefits and then we change our minds, we may be put in a position having to repay MIA the cost that they've put out.
Director Polderman.
The village of Lytton, through its lease agreement, already owns approximately 23/25 of the building through that lease agreement, as we'd already been making payments on said building for 23 years. We were supposed to own it after 25. So when the village says that it is planning to rebuild our 23 of our 23/25 is saying we are rebuilding.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion on this recommendation as now amended? I'm seeing none. All in favor? Is anyone opposed? That's carried. Thank you. That didn't take long. That brings us to 7.1.4, the Canada Building, Community Building Fund. And there is a recommendation.
I'd like to move the recommendation.
I thought you might.
Yes, and point out that this is a regional park that belongs to the Tnrd.
I'll second that.
It's seconded. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? No one's opposed. Good, that's carried. Amended 2022 board and committee meeting schedule. There is a recommendation.
Move the recommendation.
Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. The flood and fire season preparedness update. I think we're going to hear from Mr. Vieira and perhaps even from, or maybe only from Mr. Vieira.
Chair
Nope.
Gillis? They're just on their way. They were just outside the room.
Oh, there he is. We are going to hear from Kevin.
We good? Awesome. So I was going to try to pull the CAO verbal report tactic here and kind of give it all to Kev to do, but I don't know if I can do that. But thanks for having me. Quick slides on what we do with our fire departments with preparedness on floods and fires, and we'll just get to it here. The biggest piece is really public education when it comes to the local fire departments and how they engage within their fire service areas. This picture is from early April and the Pritchard Fire Department, and they had an open house. And you'll see that the white pickup in the back is from wildfire. They attend when they can, and we had 3 fire prevention specialists that attended this. And of course, the Ember, the Firefox, and that's all to do with the Fire Smart program and promotional pieces. I don't know if you guys can tell from that, but it's actually snowing right there in that picture. And I think the only one warm is the Fox. So inside the building, they set up, and I should add, this is similar to what most of our fire departments do at different times through the spring. And on that table, there's a number of different educational pamphlets, different sprinkler styles and heads, and those yellow bags are sprinkler kits that you can get from a manufacturer that they're kind of grab and go kits and for homeowners to apply them to their own structures. And of course, the TV in the back is the Fire Smart just on a rolling video. One back. Within this is what the wildfire brought with some of their Fire Smart material, and they, as of course this was staging at the beginning and the public wasn't quite here yet, but as those stations are staffed, then as the public comes through, then they can explain the Fire Smart techniques and And they have some things for the kids as well on the floor. There's a couple bean bags in that box. To the left is OSB structure with little flap doors that the kids can throw bean bags at, and then it keeps them engaged. On the outside, you'll see a couple sea cans in the back right there. That's to represent a typical structure, I guess, if you use your imagination a bit. And on those, we have the sprinkler units mounted, and then that 1,500-gallon pumpkin is full of water with a Wajax pump that pressurizes those sprinklers, and it gives people an idea of what they would do when they took those sprinklers and put them on their own houses, and kind of the spray of the sprinkler pattern and what they would get. And of course, we're always looking for young recruits. So if we get somebody behind a hose and get them engaged, and we try to sign them up right away. He's probably a couple years out, but he's almost there. The other piece with this is training, and that's just a quick snapshot of our matrix of what all our firefighters have to go through to be able to be compliant with the OFC guidelines. Part of this is a shot out at Blackpool. They're doing that's not snow, that's a type A foam that they're spraying, doing some practice on suppression, and that's a big debris pile that's kind of under the arc of that engaged nozzle there. This is also at Blackpool, and this is at the back end of a type 2 sprinkler protection unit that actually resides in Pritchard. And again, our fire departments do train together, and they fight fire together as well. And this is just a typical deployment of the equipment and kit out of that trailer. Again, the other piece on preparedness is the prevention side, and we have these pre-made kits that all the fire departments have. And so whether it's an open house or they're doing some other engagement with the public, they give them these tote bags, and in there are those pamphlets that you see that help educate the people on having a proper home preparedness plan, smoke alarms, and that bottom right is actually a smoke CO detector that we were able to procure from the Fire Chiefs Association for $0, and we had a big skid of those that we distributed throughout our fire department, so they can help people if they don't have a active working smoke or CO alarm, they can take those and install them in their houses. That is, again, at Blackpool, they had a work bee, and those are all mounts for sprinklers. And I think there's about 300 of them there that they made for their open house that's coming up this weekend. And the transition is getting the heads and the hose mounts, and then that's kind of a typical one house kit that they'll sell to anyone that wants to purchase one from the fire department. The other piece with prevention is pre-planning. So that map indicates the Blackpool fire service area. The purple pins are actually properties that the fire department's gone and done inspections on, and again would have explained to the homeowners, what they need to do to clean up their properties, and some strategy and tactics to help them be as fire smart as possible with the resources they have. And that's kind of how they've zoned out their fire protection area, and then strategically kind of go to each zone while they have the resources to do it and keep track of it. You see the blue pins, that's where they have pre-staged water reservoirs that they can access, because of course, most of our fire departments don't have hydrant systems like we do in a lot of our municipalities. So we have to be a little creative in having access to water. And the 3 red pins that you'll see at the top right and left, and at the bottom left, are areas where there's some density. So if the fire was to come in from an interface, that's where they're planning on putting the big water cannons to create a humidity dome in those areas to help move the fire from getting into the, like, for instance, that top left is a trailer court. So that is a place that definitely you don't want a fire to get into. And this is the end of it, and that's our chief at Tobiano, and there's a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow, I guess. So.
Quick
So
and
are
dirty
there-
for me. Any questions?
Are there questions for Mr. Tomlin? There are a zillion questions for you, Mr. Tomlin, starting with Director Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Tomlin. When we approved the fire, I forget what we call them, the training guide. There was an indication you'll be able to provide service, I would guess, on a fee-for-service basis in the future for small fire departments and fire brigades, et cetera. Is that still part of the plan?
Absolutely. As that position develops, we're going to look at how we can best utilize that resource. Absolutely.
Thank you. I have Director Rice and Director Elliott. Is there anyone, Director Brown and Director Stamer?
Thank you, Chair. Mine's a quick one, Jason. How much does one of those one house kits cost about?
$180 is the one that was on that oak table that's made by Blackpool Fire Department. That pretty much covers their cost. And, or sorry, 280. 280.
Is it 280?
Cancel that. 280. Thank you.
And then could you just ship me off the information on that and stuff like that? Because there might be some people that would be interested in getting that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Director Rice, because you just took my name off the list of questions. Director Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jason, are we going to be able to do some fire smart work where there is no fire department?
Absolutely. I think that'll dovetail into Mr. Skrepnik's presentation around that regional piece on outside of our fire protection areas.
Yeah, but kind of Cherry Creek is kind of stuck in the middle of several of them, but we still need to have some education in that area and providing we can find a place to have and can be open house, like it can be an open public meeting.
Agreed. And I think that the new position that Director Quinn was speaking of is also there's a fire smart component to that position that will help target those communities that don't have a fire department.
Before we go into fire season? No?
We haven't hired them yet.
Director Brown.
You probably already know that the city of Merritt has budgeted an SPU unit this year. Now, whether that means we get the RFP out only this year or whether we get it out and receive the SPU unit this year, I'm not sure of, but it's in our budget and there'll be another one in the region.
Thank you, Director Stamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question, and I guess it might be taken the wrong way, but sometimes it does. But whose idea was it to implement a sprinkler system for these homeowners in the first place? Because I mean, that's fine and dandy, but what happens if a water system has to conserve water for their fire hydrants and restrict water for those systems? Isn't it more effective to promote a fire smarting their properties and their homes and not tax the water delivery system, especially if a water system doesn't have a generator backup and no way of replenishing a water system or existing reservoir? So why is there the big push on these sprinklers to put on these roofs when if all of a sudden we have a power outage and we don't have a way of replenishing the water? Isn't it more important to be protecting our reservoirs and our fire hydrants than having everybody put their sprinklers on? Am I the only one thinking about that? So I'd like to know a little bit more clarity why we're pushing that. I mean, sure, if you're out by yourself and you think that that's great, but I'm not sure if we want to be full-heartedly recommending to our subdivisions that we should be putting sprinkler systems on their homes, knowing that we're not having enough water in an emergency to be able to supply the water in the first place.
Mr. Tomlin, did you have any on the list?
Absolutely. Thanks, Chair. I guess it doesn't, the answer essentially in a municipal type water system, and we can use Logan Lake as an example that was very successful last year where they have pre-staged sprinklers on structures and the fire department essentially manages that resource as I understand it. And so there's also a educational component to when people put it on their own houses. And then there's the rural areas where they're on independent wells. Yes, if the power goes out, how do you push the water through your well? Having said that, if these resources are deployed on structures when wildfire or your structural fire department show up, it saves time because then they don't have to go and take resources from their own cash and put those on those structures. So it's, I guess, a more realistic and expeditious approach to getting water out on those areas.
Thanks. Director Schaefer.
I just wanted to say that if anybody wants the phone number for Mike Savage that is involved with Blackpool Fire Department, I've got his email address and his phone number if anybody's interested in one of these contraptions.
Director Watson.
Yes, our area is not served by a hydrant system at all, and we have been working on self-sufficiency because nobody else is coming. So we have been putting structural protection units on our own homes. Those people who can afford it, and we bought a used above ground pool and fill that, and we just fire up our pumps and keep the humidity around our area, our home and our buildings up. And last year, because it was so dry, we sprinkled behind our home on the Crown land because we haven't had any fire smarting on the Crown land behind our house, which desperately needs it. So we're not supporting everybody in a city on a water system doing this. It's people who can do it, please do it, because that will mean there's less need for the structural protection units to come in for everyone.
Thank you. Director Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Tallman, for your presentation. I just as one of the things that we observed last year, structural protection teams that did come in were quite happy to see the houses plotted that already had sprinkler systems on their roofs. So I don't know whether you're plotting those as well, but that's definitely helpful information for structural protection to have. If you're not. And the other thing is just to Director Stamer's question. A lot of those sprinklers are not actually used or even used at all. Maybe they're not turned on and left on. We did have a situation where somebody did turn one on an apartment building and left it on, and the building actually flooded, and one of our council members has been displaced since. So there is definitely problems when you put it on and leave it on. The other thing is the structural protection was able to test and know what water was available from all of our fire hydrants. And many times they actually hooked up those sprinklers to bladders that were brought in. So it wasn't always to our central water system.
Thanks, Director Smith. Director Rice, did you have something further?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd just like to know the dynamics of our rural communities are different. As Director Watts has pointed out, they do it some way. And Spencer's Bridge, we were really interesting because we used to be gravity fed off of Murray Creek. Tnrd and Cooks Ferry got together and they put in a 3 deep water well system 5 or 6 years ago and stuff like that. So when the wildfires came through this past year, what BC wildfires did, they came in and they put protection on every building. We had 6 on our packing house. And so they sort of, and then we did a test run because our water system is not built for fire protection. So, but they did a test run and it was perfect. It went 100%. So we know now our water system can actually put rooftop protection during an emergency, and it will actually support that. And when I checked with the levels with Tyrone and Jake to see where our reservoirs were, they only went down to 70%. It didn't even impact our reservoirs during that time. So it was sort of a real litmus test. But my point is each community is built a little bit differently with a little bit different dynamic with their water systems. And so you sort of got to figure out what's going to work for us. One of the I think important parts of having the wildfires last year, especially is we do know that is possible and stuff like that. So the sprinkler top systems and stuff. Now, we didn't have to use it, but we had to use it at our farm out there. So they are a valuable tool in fighting fires. But I do think the diversity of their rural communities means everybody's going to have a different answer for what works.
Thank you. I think that pretty much does it, Mr. Tomlin. Thanks ever so much for your presentation. I expect we can hear now from Mr. Skrepnik.
Right, thank you.
Well, good afternoon. So yeah, we're going to approach everything, in balance. Jason's presentation was all images and mine's all going to be words. So I apologize for some busy slides coming up. But I just want to hit on 4 main areas around the kind of emergency management portfolio, obviously, as we're heading into what is, historically going to be our busier time of the year here. So want to hit on 4 things. So the after action review that we recently did for the 2021 wildfire season, what we've got going on right now in terms of response activity that we're still undertaking from the incidents last year, what we're doing around preparedness for the 2022 seasons as they approach, and what the outlook is both for freshet season and for wildfire as well. So we did have our after action review or our debrief about a month ago for wildfire season 2021. Obviously, that was quite a bit later than we would have liked to have had it. We initially had gotten the funding approved from the province and had scheduled it for the 4th week of November of last year. And obviously other events overtook our scheduling there, and we've kind of been off to the races since then. Something that we did differently from previous years is we had a facilitator conduct this session for us. So we had Steve Newton, who's a local emergency management contractor who does a lot of training and other projects for us. Steve and some of his staff came in to facilitate this session, which I think worked quite well based on the feedback we had from staff. By having someone kind of from the outside looking in, it's a little bit, they can pick away at some of the issues a little bit better. They have a bit of a different viewpoint on things when they're external. And it also made it so we've now got we have a draft report in hand that basically pulled together a lot of the findings and the lessons learned that we talked about at that debrief. So we had both our own staff and then external agencies present. So the City of Kamloops, BC Wildfire Service, Emergency Management BC, Ministry of Transportation, the Red Cross, Columbia Shuswap Regional District, Tacoma Squamish, as well as BC Cattlemen's. We did extend invitations as well to the RCMP, Interior Health, and another agency that escapes me right now. Unfortunately, they weren't able to attend, but we're certainly going to be having some one-on-one discussions with them as well. And as I mentioned, we did receive a draft report last week from the contractor rolling up the findings from the debrief. Myself and Scott and Jamie are going to be reviewing that, and then once it's done, we'll be distributing it out widely so folks can see what came of that. So we're in a bit of a unique situation this season in that we are still very much in the midst of response. Our EOC has been activated since November 15th, obviously to a much smaller scale now than it was when the atmospheric river struck, but we do still have a number of ongoing concerns. Our resiliency manager, who's Dale Kronbush, who's been working since early July, initially on the fires, and of course now also on the flooding, is still very much engaged. For the most part, Dale is working from home in Penticton, but he's still here quite routinely, and over in Monty Lake, Spence's Bridge, some of the other communities that have been impacted, trying to support folks as best as we can. Highway 8 obviously still very much impassable right now, so we are coordinating with MOTI around the rebuilding efforts, trying to regain what they've got a 4-phase approach right now in terms of returning it to a standard highway alignment. They're very much still in phase 1 right now, which is basically just emergency access and egress, and even that obviously is still being hampered quite a bit by just the sheer scale of what happened on Highway 8, but also the fact, of course, the river is starting to rise again. So they have had some sites that they thought they were done with that have become problematic again just in the last few weeks. And obviously still quite a bit of debris, both in the Nicola and Coldwater rivers that Ministry of Environment is working on getting out of there. We've got 2 ongoing protective projects going on right now. So in the community of Brookmere, we have built a temporary berm on Brook Creek where it broke in November from the atmospheric river. We did just get approval from the province for some additional funding to armor that further with some additional riprap and do a few tweaks to the structure that has been put in, but we're already heads and tails ahead of where it was obviously post-flood. We're going to be coordinating with MOTI. They have a lot of work to do in the community as well in terms of restoring some of their infrastructure, primarily the roads that were quite impacted by the flooding. So we're going to be coordinating with them in terms of the works that we're doing from a protective perspective. That's ongoing right now, but our contractor plans on kicking that off this coming Monday in terms of the coordination with MOTI. Then there was also a home on Spias Creek where we got approval from the province to, we presented them a number of options for what could be done to protect that house. The option that the province supported was for us to armor it, to basically install riprap as much as possible to protect it from Spias Creek. So far, so good, but obviously, as we saw in November, those systems can change on a dime. So hoping that situation at least temporarily is dealt with, and the homeowner is going to be working with some residents in the area to see what can be done down the road, potentially realigning Spias Creek itself. And then we are still very much becoming aware and documenting losses from 2021, which I know might seem odd, but we are still having people coming out of the woodwork who lost structures, lost homes, maybe lost secondary structures that we weren't made aware of during the response from the wildfire service. They may have not engaged us through the resiliency center as well. And where this is coming through quite often is with our debris cleanup, debris management, and through the Red Cross. When these people are looking for support, we don't actually have on file that they had losses. So as recently as a few weeks ago, we were in Westwold at a property where we weren't able to access previously because of fire activity to document that a gentleman did actually lose his house there. So in terms of preparedness, so a lot going on right now, and I know that's certainly what piqued the board's attention in terms of wanting to have this this presentation now from a timeliness perspective. So yeah, we've got a lot going on from a preparedness perspective. So a concern for us certainly, and I'll get into it a little further in the outlook section, but around the North Thompson. So we have seen some numbers in terms of the snowpack in the North Thompson that are certainly concerning, and some additional preliminary numbers were released somewhat in earnest earlier this week, and I'll talk about that in a bit, and unfortunately still trending in the wrong direction. So we do have a meeting tomorrow with a number of provincial agencies, as well as District of Barrier, District of Clearwater, SIP First Nation, as well as the City of Kamloops, looking at vulnerabilities along the North Thompson, where we need to start looking at proactive works in there. And then the downstream concerns as well. So obviously, if the North Thompson is going to be high this year, Kamloops Lake as well could be a concern for Savanaugh, Frederick, and areas in there. We had a number of meetings with BC Wildfire, but our most recent one was with the staff at the Lytton Fire Base yesterday. An issue they've brought up, and certainly I know Director Rice is aware of this, there's a bit of a slow moving slide on Highway 12 at 2 Mile, so just north of Lytton. And unfortunately, the reality is MOTI has no practical solution for it, at least for the time being. Now, that's a concern from a number of reasons. We saw how quickly Lytton became landlocked during the atmospheric river, but of course, folks there are very much relying on access to Lillooet for day-to-day needs, for hospital policing, the whole 9 yards. So we are looking at, there is a Forest Service road, the Lawalissing Creek FSR, that actually basically bypasses where this slide is. So we're going to be basically advocating with Ministry of Forests. The maintenance of that FSR has been hit and miss. But given that this could become very quickly a very critical egress route, both for folks in the Botany Valley, but as well if the other highways do get cut off, which we saw how easily that can happen in the river, that we have another route available. So we're going to be working with Cascades Forest District to see if we can have them pay some extra attention to that FSR. So we've got that extra route in our back pocket. Mr. Tomlin had touched on it already, but a number of emergency preparedness open houses have already occurred and will be occurring. This was Emergency Preparedness Week as well. So there is a number of them happening this weekend. There is one in Blackpool where they're going to have these sprinkler kits that we've been discussing available for purchase. And then Village of Chase is also having their own emergency preparedness open house this weekend. And we'll be participating in both. I'll be in Blackpool, and Rebecca Cook from City of Kamloops, who supports us through our ESS memorandum of understanding, will be in Chase. And then around fire smarting. So obviously we've touched on this a little bit already. With the new position that was approved by the board recently, that is going to be looking after the fire department training, but also at Fire Smart at a regional level, which is fantastic. I think the province has definitely, in the last 5 years, Fire Smart has really evolved. It used to be a bit of a hot potato that was getting tossed from ministry to ministry in terms of who was responsible for it and who was really pushing it. That has changed over the last 5 years. We now have the BC Fire Smart Committee. There's a lot more time and resources getting put into that. So I'm glad to see us kind of responding commensurate to that. We have had a number of communities that have reached out proactively that are putting together their own local Fire Smart groups. So a few of them, but South Green Lake, Lac Lejeune, and Heffley Lake have all been in contact with us recently. So obviously, once we had that new position in place, they're going to be taking on that portfolio and kind of giving it the effort and attention that it deserves. But we are supporting these groups for the time being. We're going to be speaking to they've got some events coming up at Heffley in particular, South Green Lake and Lac Lejeune. We've been able to provide, we have stockpiles of Fire Smart manuals and other materials, things like that we can share with them. And the Fire Smart conference is actually happening in Kamloops next week. So that's a province-wide Fire Smart conference up on the hill here. We'll have a few people from Tnrd attending. I'll be presenting at it as well. This is the first in-person Fire Smart conference that has happened. Obviously, because of COVID, they did have some sort of a virtual event, I believe, last year, but this will be the first time it'll be in person. And I think to Director Stamer's, comments, the sprinkler units, I think, are a very important aspect. And as we saw evidence in Logan Lake this year, but there is a lot more to Fire Smart than that. It's the type of vegetation and trees that you're putting on the property, their location in terms of how they're spaced out, cleaning out eaves troughs, things as simple as that, moving your wood piles and propane cylinders away from the house. There's a lot that can be done to make that a more defensible space. So on the preparedness front, so you've probably heard this number thrown out before, but in 2021, we had 293 evacuation alerts and orders, and our RGIS folks ran the numbers. That was 60% of the activity in the entire province came out of this room in terms of alerts and orders in 2021. So full credit to NATO and our GIS department and a number of the folks who worked in planning last summer in the EOC. We've been looking at what opportunities we have to try to streamline that. Was all of the paperwork for these necessary? Are there ways we can be doing it more efficiently? And credit to the province as well. They've been a part of that, so we can understand what's acceptable from the NBC's standpoint as well. We've had a number of discussions around how we can streamline that process, both in terms of the paperwork, but also the approvals as well, so that we can get these out not only as quickly as possible, but doing so in a manner that it's as straightforward to the public as possible. We have also, since last July, a new group was struck, including ourselves, the province, the City of Kamloops, and Tecumseh-Chouetmec. That group's been meeting bi-weekly over the last year to look at locally what we can be doing to coordinate as best as possible. There is going to be a half-day exercise in early June involving all of the members of that group. And I think it's been a successful model that we can look at how we can implement that elsewhere, where we've got different levels of government, obviously all operating in the same area. Around public alerting, so I would imagine everyone's phones went off at 1:55 yesterday for the province's alert ready test. So I think maybe just to explain a little bit of what the delineation is. So The province's alerting system, it's called Alert Ready, or you might hear it referred to as a broadcast intrusive alert. So that is coming through your phone, whether you want it or not. It also goes through television stations, radio stations as well. And up until now, it has only been used in BC for earthquakes, tsunamis, and amber alerts, as well as tornado warnings, but thankfully those are few and far between. It has been expanded to include flooding and wildfire. That happened in the middle of the atmospheric river event. That functionality was made available to us. We almost did use it for an evacuation at Spice Creek, where it was very time sensitive, but it just wasn't going to be the right tool at the time. But since then, the province has now opened it up. So if we do have the need for evacuation alerts and orders this summer, that's an additional tool we have. Now, that is separate from the Buoyant alert tool that we have had for a few years now. So the Buoyant tool is run by Tnrd. It is subscription based, so people need to sign up for it and provide their location, what locations they want to be alerted for. It's somewhat different from the provincial system. It'll also place landline phone calls for people who have signed up for it. So if they don't have cell phone service, they'll actually get an automated voice recording over a landline phone. We are also testing the Buoyant alert system this week. That's going to be tomorrow at 2. Again, that's tied in with Emergency Preparedness Week. So 2 different systems. They're both doing slightly different things. I think down the road, we'll probably see this merge. The reason why we brought the Buoyant alert system on in 2020 was because we didn't have access yet to the provincial system. So I think this will evolve over time, but I think it will probably be a little confusing to the public, but that there are these 2 different avenues, and obviously where you're going to use both of them if the need arises. But yeah, 2 very different systems. And then from a training perspective, so we've due to COVID, the Justice Institute has made almost all of their courses available online, which has really opened the door for a lot more training to be done. Many of these courses in emergency management had to be done in person, and they were 2 or 3 day courses, which caused a lot of logistical issues in terms of folks being able to get into them. With COVID, a lot of that was made online. So we've had a number of our staff and municipal staff who have been able to take emergency management courses in terms of the foundations of working in an EOC, how emergency management works. Have been able to undertake that. We're also hosting a train the trainer session here in June for ICS Canada. ICS is the Incident Command System. So when we activate the EOC and you hear titles like EOC Director and Information Officer, things like that, that all flows from the Incident Command System. ICS Canada has been endorsed by the province to basically start doing this in BC, whereas it only used to be through the Justice Institute. The idea here, we are going to host this session where we're going to have 15 local folks from our region who are basically going to take a 2 day course where they can now train people in ICS. So whereas this is something we used to have to ship them off to New Westminster for, we'll be able to deliver that internally. And in an ideal world, we'll have that fire department trainer position hired and in the seat by that point. It's going to be in late June so that they can start delivering that training to the fire departments as well. So in terms of the seasonal outlook, now this is, I had mentioned this is very preliminary. So we typically get these snowpack bulletins every month or so once we get into the spring. So the full report isn't actually going to be released until next week, until May 10th. Now, having said that, Minister Farnsworth actually had a media briefing a few days ago, and they flashed this up on the screen, and I was able to grab it off Twitter because this is preliminary data that hadn't actually been released yet. The biggest concern for us, you'll see on here, they've bumped the North Thompson up now to 132% of normal in terms of the snowpack. So to put some context around that, these are preliminary numbers. We're going to get more information about it tomorrow in our call with the province, and obviously the full report will be next week, but definitely not trending in the right direction. So it likely won't be 132% on the dot when we get the final version, but we aren't seeing the drop that we would have hoped to have seen in the North Thompson there. The rest of the TNRD, for the most part, we're still in the normal to normal-ish range. So obviously that's definitely a concern for us. Having said that, snowpack is one piece of freshet concerns, but the short-term weather is still going to be a major driver. So if we still have relatively gradual warming, we don't have any major rain on snow events, we still might get away without seeing any significant flooding, but certainly having the snowpack numbers that high isn't a good sign heading into it. And we are expecting relatively cool weather for most of May. In terms of the wildfire season, the province released this incredibly useful graphic yesterday. So basically normal for the next month or so in terms of fire activity. So, I mean, I'll put on my old hat from my previous role with the province. In BC, and particularly in this part of the province, we essentially have two fire seasons. We have basically from when the snow melts in March through to the May long weekend. You can pretty much set your watch to the fact that the May long weekend, the rain starts, and then it rains typically to Canada Day. June is usually when we get a lot of our precipitation, our non-snow precipitation for the year is usually in June. So we can have a fairly busy spring season, grass fires, things like that, especially when there's a lot of dead fuel before we've had the green up, before the grass has gotten greener and the leaves have returned to the trees. And we've seen a number of examples of that, unfortunately, over the last few weeks. Typically, though, we have those June rains, that's sort of the reset, and then we have the slow march into the season kind of from late June into July and August. The intense seasons we've had in the past, so 2017 and 2021, that didn't happen. We were almost 3 or 4 weeks ahead of schedule. June was very, very dry, and then that set the stage for how those seasons were both so aggressive. So this is all to say we really aren't going to know until we're into June what the summer is going to look like. We could have an exceptionally busy spring, get all of our rain, and the summer is a breeze. We could have a rainy spring. June could be exceptionally dry like last year, and we'll have a busy summer. So unfortunately, this is one that we're going to have to keep an eye on going forward. Obviously, it's good news from a fire perspective to look out the window and see the rain right now, but obviously from a flooding perspective, we're damned if we do, damned if we don't. So in terms of how this correlates to the snowpack numbers, obviously mid to high elevation, if there's still snow there, less of a chance for fires to start. This is typically more of a sign of once we get into June and July and we have more lightning caused fires, they typically are more likely to start at the mid to high elevation. So that's more so where the snowpack numbers are going to be of concern. In the valley bottoms, where obviously most of the communities and structures are, obviously the snow is already melted there, and the level of snow at the higher elevation is of less importance. And that was it for me. So I welcome any questions at this point.
Thank you, Kevin. I am really happy to see that we are working proactively instead of reactively, working with riprap, trying to keep slopes stable and all of that. We are still dealing with 2017 wildfire damage and damage caused by fires that were lit by BC Wildfire. Is there any way that we could, that you might help me get the province to pay attention to this?
Yeah, yeah, Director Watson, or Chair through the Director Watson. Yeah, and I'm familiar with the situation we're talking about. I know we were emailing back and forth about it last week. From my toolkit, a lot of our funding and resources flow through the province. So for us to respond, we have to show an imminent risk, and the definition of what that is and isn't, unfortunately, lies with the province when we make our applications for when we want to do work. So with that property in particular, there's a long history there, and there have been some folks in the province who have definitely been champions for that landowner, and I'm hoping we can call on them to try to see what can be done. I realize it's a tricky situation there, not only in terms of the house, but the driveway or the MOTI road, depending on how people look at it, that goes in. So no, we can definitely, let's discuss that and see what we can do.
Thank you, Director Polderman. I have Director Polderman, Director Singh, Director Roden, and Director Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You were saying that you're getting access from Botany Valley over to Lulla West, and there's a section of reserve in there. And I'm hoping that you work with the First Nation to ensure that the residents can go through.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it'll be, obviously it's FLNR, or I don't know what they're called anymore, Ministry of Forests, that is going to be looking after the road. But yeah, we would be working with everybody that would be on that corridor in terms of making sure it's available, certainly.
Thank you, Director Singh.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. it's nice to see Mr. Skrepnik at the, well, not see him on the podium, but hear his voice. He's guys working with us now and at the TNRD. A couple of things. One is, and they really revolve around staff elected kind of relationships. So, and I mentioned this before, I think one of the things that I'm always confused by is, how a person who's not a chair or a mayor is kind of involved with emergency management stuff. So some people say that the chair and mayor signs a state of emergency and that's it. Some people say that the council or board has to eventually ratify that. And just some training. I've only ever been to one training around the roles and responsibilities of elected officials in emergencies. I think that'd be very useful to have. So I know that, and last week or whatever it was when we talked to BC Wildfire, and EMBC, they would be interested in doing that with us too. They just wanted us to come through our own staff to ask for that. So I just wanted some reflection on that from you, Mr. Skrepnik. And the second one is, I think, I'm on the this provincial UBCM committee around flood and wildfire, but it's become really emergency practices, that committee. Sometimes things get raised there that aren't strictly based on the updated legislation. They're updates on kind of what's happening on the ground with emergency management. So just, I can pass along whatever I can to you folks from there. And if you want to pass along information, that might be coming up. We ran a bit of an issue last year with that financing thing at the board, that we sent that letter that maybe we should have been sent. But anyway, so I just wanted to kind of flag those two things for you. One is kind of a question around training, and the other one's a comment around, extending my hand to help with anything around something we can help with that committee. So those two things.
Yeah, Chair through to Director Singh. So yeah, EMBC does have a course specifically for elected officials to kind of work through what the roles and responsibilities are and aren't. So yeah, I can definitely, that it was my understanding that was usually set up through UBCM, but if you've been told differently, I'll reach out to EMBC and see if we can have something organized. I agree. I think that would be quite useful. I'm just looking over to CAO Hildebrand if there's anything around last year in terms of our work with the elected officials and how updates were happening, things like that from your perspective, if we might be approaching that differently.
I thought last year, I'd be open to your response as well, but I thought last year we did our best when we came out of our daily meetings. That information was immediately communicated to this board in detail, and we did that on a daily basis between myself and Ms. Campbell. We would continue to do that. I would also acknowledge what you said there about training for elected officials as well, and perhaps we can build that into our orientation with the new boards after the election as well. So both of those I would support.
Well, and don't get me wrong. I mean, the communication from staff was, I think, excellent. It's a question of elected officials stepping in the soup sometimes, getting too involved with operational stuff, or it's sort of what I've seen kind of happen. And I think that's good to kind of have that figured out, at least how that works. I think probably at the regional district board, it's less of a problem sometimes than some of it is the councils, but I think it's also good to have. Yeah.
Thank you, Director Roden.
Thank you. Sort of further to that discussion, I think that something that might be helpful is just ensuring that our response is the same, whether a fire or a flood or anything happens in Blue River or 70 Mile or Spence's Bridge or Wallachine or Savanaw, that the response is the same to all the residents, that they know what to expect in the aftermath of something disastrous happening. The other thing I just wanted to ask about is someone brought to my attention that yesterday, May 4th, the Village of Lytton, just looking on my other computer here, there was a Fire Smart presentation, and in two different places, the Village of Lytton specifically said, registration to this session is only available to residents of the Village of Lytton and Lytton First Nation. And it appears to have been a Lytton post-fire examination report, BC Fire Smart presentation on May the 4th. So just wondering why apparently people who don't live in Lytton or Lytton First Nations who live up Botany were not included. And is there a chance the TNRD might be able to do something?
Yeah, Chair through the Director Roden. I'm tangentially aware of that session that took place, and that's actually, I heard about it through the Village of Lytton open house community meeting that happened last week. So that was what was presented, my understanding is that basically FireSmart had brought in experts around structural ignition, around basically how and why houses burn during fires. They came into Lytton following the fire and did a research study, essentially. So they were basically presenting those findings back. I agree. I think that would be useful not only for folks in Lytton, but in the surrounding area and throughout the TNRD. So I can talk to FireSmart. I'm not sure if it was a recorded session or if they've got the materials available beyond that. But no, I agree that would be useful.
I understand. Thank you for that. I understand that the presentation itself was recorded. I do not think the Q&A session, such as it might have been, was, but if the presentation is available, I think that would be something that would certainly be very valuable to share with more residents.
Thank you, Director Rice.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks for the presentation, Kevin and Jason. The MOTI lead, provincial lead for the project, Sean Clough, came out to the farm yesterday, and we had a good chat, and he was very clear that a couple of the properties, including one of the ones that has driveway access to it, with the spring freshet approaching, maybe compromise to the point where they will not be able to go home. Now, these people have already, this is just one example, but this is one, there's only two people home from the Spencer's Bridge side, ourselves and this party, and they've been home a little bit longer than us. They've been back a couple of weeks. My question to you, he said, he actually said, you're gonna have to talk to Kevin, but and I'm not expecting any answers right now, but I think we need to be aware when this freshet comes, it's not gonna be just that property. It's gonna be, there's gonna be, including ours, a different scenario and stuff like that. I'm just wondering if you guys have sort of looked ahead, because he was clear, the province will not be able to help them.
Yeah, Chair, through to Director Rice. So yeah, I'm familiar with the property in question, and I had a similar conversation with Sean a few days ago as well. So, and I think from it's an issue of MOTI might not be able to help in that situation, because it's primarily a concern around their egress, around their access. So we're going to look at what, and of course, what does muddy the waters a bit is that the area that's vulnerable is Crown land. So we are going to have to work with forestry in terms of whether we can push for something to be done there. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Director Polderman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At multiple council meetings, I asked people to come to the FireSmart presentation. And I believe that our meetings are open to the public. I know that all sorts of government people also watch the presentation. So I take a bit of umbrage with the idea that it was exclusively for the village. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Christian. No? Good. I have a couple of questions for you, Mr. Skripnik, or maybe only one. I noted something to the effect that there was going to be training for local incident managers or something along those lines. I know there was a serious question raised about a fire in the North Thompson last year where the incident commander was changed in the middle of the fire, which is a topic for another day. And the new incident commander was from Newfoundland. And the next day the fire was across the valley and took off on its merry way and had its and did as it pleased. Am I to understand from you that we are going to be training more incident managers, so we will have local people doing that job?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. So this training is fairly foundational, basic training. So this would be something that we would deliver to members of a fire department, to search and rescue crews, things like that. To get into the weeds a bit, so incident command system, ICS, there's 4 levels of training. So this would be a course where we would certify people that they'd be able to train the 100 and 200 level. So this is for the small scale incidents. And again, the benefit here more so is that this for our own staff, for our fire department staff, for the agencies we work with locally, that they'll have more of that training. It's not to the level of being able to be an incident commander on a large complex situation like that.
Thank you. So I was wrong when I thought I might have detected a faint glimmer of hope there. I did simply want to say, Mr. Skrupnik, that it is indeed encouraging, in my view, to see what is happening at the local level, what you are doing. I think Director Watts has referred to that. I'm pleased to see it. And it's all, we are doing all we can do, and we can only hope that maybe some other levels of government might take a leaf out of your book. Thanks ever so much for what you do. I'm going to call a break, but I think perhaps before the break, we could deal with the building permit activity highlights. And in that regard, I wish only to mention that the planning department has been extraordinarily busy. Don't think there's really anything we have to deal with, is there, Mr. Hildebrand, other than the fact that we've received the activity highlights, and perhaps someone would like to move that we receive them for information.
Move for information.
Seconded, anybody? Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you, that's carried, and we will recess now until 3:40. It is 3:40. We're back in session. Or we will be when I can find my spot in the agenda. Yeah, I just had to find the page, dear. Okay, internal committees, audit committee, Director Rain.
Good afternoon, everyone. The audit committee did meet, as you've seen. The minutes of the draft minutes are ready. I would recommend that we wait until the audit committee has met and approved those minutes. They're not approved yet by the committee. So I think at our next meeting, we'll approve those minutes and then bring them back for receipt by the board. I would also ask that we have staff consider a meeting in June. We're going to need to do an RFP for auditors for the coming year or years. There's also some discussion about reorganization plan for the audit committee. And the audit committee has had some discussions about internal auditors and how that might proceed. So if staff feel comfortable, perhaps after the May meetings, we could have a June meeting with the audit committee.
Mr. Hildebrand?
We can certainly accommodate that.
Certainly, thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Director Rain. Economic Development Recreation, Director Roden.
No meeting, no report.
That's good news. Electoral Area Directors, Director Kershaw.
No meeting, no report.
Emergency Management and Protective Services, Director Watson's not here. Director Laird is not here. Director Graham is here. Has there been a meeting, Director Graham of Emergency Management? Policy Review Committee, Director Sinclair. Well, that's Director Roden.
No meeting, no report. Next meeting is on May 18th.
Thank you. Regional Solid Waste Management, Director Schaefer.
I'd like to move the minutes be accepted and move the recommendation also.
Well, should we start with the minutes?
Sure.
Okay,
I'd like to.
any discussion? All in favor? Is anyone opposed? That's carried and
I'd like to move the recommendation.
moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Invasive Plant Management, Director Kershaw.
Next meeting on the 18th. No meeting, no report.
Thank you. Thompson Regional Hospital District, Director Christian.
Thank you. There's been no meeting, but I would like to remind the directors that we are touring Royal Inland Hospital's new patient care tower 10:30 on the 19th prior to our next meeting.
Thank you. Utility System Director Elliott.
Mr. Chairman, I will move the adoption of the information of the minutes and answer any questions.
Moved, seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Oh, Director Rothenberger, sorry.
Just a question in regards to the recommendation that came out of the Utility Systems Committee to the board with respect to asking the province and UBCM to look into new ways of funding small water systems. The motion from our board meeting was that staff would come forward with a revised proposal to this meeting, and it's not on the agenda, so I just wondered what the status of that is.
Is there any progress on that, Ms. Campbell?
Through the chair to Director Rothenberger, yes, there is, but we just couldn't get something put together for this meeting, so it will be at the May 19th, our next board meeting. And it will be in, it will be in time, it will be in time to get it submitted to UBCM for their deadlines for their resolutions.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Director Duty.
Yeah, just to satisfy my confusion here, Director Rain had chose not to move the minutes because they were draft minutes and felt they needed to be read at the committee meeting. And I noticed that we're accepting minutes that are also draft minutes here. So which is it? Do we wait till it goes through committee before it comes to us, or do we accept minutes even though they're in a draft situation?
Through the chair to director duty. So you actually don't need to receive them for information. It's just a procedural thing that this board does and some other councils and boards do, but you don't need to. We always include them for information for the board, just so you can see what came out of that committee meeting. So they don't need to be final minutes, but you also don't need to move them.
So I think it's been moved that we receive them for information. Is there any further discussion? I see none. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thompson Headwater Services Director Quinn.
Next meeting, May 11th.
Thank you. Wells Gray Services Director Schaefer.
Next meeting, May 17th.
Thank you. Joint Services Committee Director Schaefer.
No meeting, no report.
Committee of the Whole, was a meeting April 22nd. There's a draft minutes.
Move them. Rick.
The recommendation's been moved
Second.
and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seems to be none. All in favor? Opposed? If none opposed, that's carried. External committees, Fraser Basin Council Director Rice.
Thank you, Chair. No meeting, no report, but I'd like to quickly announce that we have found a replacement for Mike Simpson at the Kamloops branch. And so the meeting has been moved from May to June, so they have time to get in place for our next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Municipal Finance Authority, Director Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's been a little while since I've been here in person, but I just want to report on the MFA 22 Financial Forum and AGM that I went to at the end of March. I took a lot of notes, but I'll just go over a few of the key ones that I think this board may be interested in. I guess I'll just start with the predictions. It was Chief Economist for BMO was there talking, and this is a lot of what he said, but he predicts inflation will finally start to lower and normalize in about a year from now. And so for towns, municipalities, villages that are looking to lock into certain contracts to keep that in mind. Overall, he said the supply chain is actually doing okay. It's the huge demand that's there outside of the semiconductor shortage that's causing some of those issues, but overall it's this surge in demand. And something that I really think is important for this board and for going back to our respective villages, municipalities and towns is there is a direct correlation between high inflation and labor unrest. And specifically as agreements start to come up that it may be harder as we go through. So just to flag that when union negotiations go on in your respective areas, just to flag that. Did mention that revenue, that money that was spent by the provincial government has actually through COVID has actually all been made up now by a rebound in revenue from the surge in the consumer spending. So all the money that was flagged for supporting COVID-19 relief funds and projects has been made up for the province. So we're actually in a very good place to help us weather future storms, whatever those may be. And I found that really interesting that it came back basically as quickly as we put it out, it came back within the next year. And lastly, there was a lot of talk and presentation about cybersecurity, specifically relating to small towns, municipalities that don't necessarily have the level of protection that they should. And these groups are going after for them. Essentially, and the quote was because they know they will pay. They know they will pay to protect their information of a town or a city. And so they are targeting those areas. So it's something that maybe want to have discussions in your respective areas over the coming months and years. But yeah, so that is what I have for today. Thank you.
Thanks, Director O'Reilly. Some sobering thoughts there. Municipal Insurance Association Director Duty.
No meeting, no report.
Shuswap Watershed Council Director Crow.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we haven't had a meeting. Next one is scheduled in June, but the annual highlights report is out and is now available to the TNRD board. Also, we just got this today, Director Christian and I. There's been an invitation sent out to the board for a tour up at Adams Lake with the Adams Lake Indian Band and other partners. The lake was determined to be deficient in nutrients to really support the fish life in the lake. So they've started, it's a 3-year program that in introducing, so they have a barge and they go up and they introduce a bunch of nutrients in the lake. And so they're anticipating that with a good return of fish up there, that at some point it'll be self-perpetuating as far as the nutrients if they get enough fish stock returning into the upper Adams. So that's my report.
Thank you. Kamloops Airport Authority, Director Roden.
No meeting, no report.
Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Director Singh.
No report, Mr. Chair, but I'm happy to take questions on my no report if anyone wants to ask me any.
Community Energy Association, Director Blackwell.
No meeting, no report.
Thank you. That takes us to new business from
Chair
member.
Gillis?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Hildebrand.
Chair Gillis, would I get you to, if you would, please go back to 8.1.13. There was a recommendation that was missed under committee of the whole. You did the minutes, but not the committee, or not the recommendation. You did the minutes, but not the recommendation. Sorry, we didn't hear that then.
So my name is Tricia Thorpe. I'm from the Botany Valley at Lytton. I'm here once again to ask for greater advocacy for the TNRD Area I residents in the Lytton area. I was last here 2 weeks ago on April 21st. At that time, I requested the TNRD to join with the Village of Lytton and Lytton LFN in speaking up to have essential services restored to the Lytton area as soon as possible. Ironically, April 22nd, my husband suffered a major heart attack. Given that the ambulance services can take 1.5 hours to 2 hours currently in the Lytton area, I phoned the hospital in Lillooet to say we were on our way and 911 to say we would meet the ambulance en route with lights flashing. I drove my husband all the way to Lillooet, normally a 55-minute drive. No one should have to drive Highway 12, a narrow, windy road prone to slides with no cell phone service. It was the road that was identified earlier by Kevin as being problematic because it currently has a slump. And no one should have to drive that road while their spouse talks about the encroaching darkness, not being afraid to die, but not wanting to leave you. We were very lucky. He had 3 smaller heart attacks en route, but Lillooet Hospital administered a super clot busting drug shortly before he had the largest heart attack. The heart attack is apparently called the Widowmaker. We spent a week in Vernon and Kelowna seeking treatment and returned home this past Saturday. Lytton, 10 months post-fire, does not have the basic essential medical services we had pre-fire that could have dealt with this emergency. Please speak up for the Lytton Area I residents. We are 30 minutes from Spence's Bridge. To the best of my knowledge, we have yet to see the area rep at the Lytton Resiliency Center. Yet Brad Viss, Jackie Taggart, and Kevin Falcon have all been there meeting and speaking with residents. Where is our representation and advocacy from our government representatives?
Your question is noted. Mr. Hildebrand, you got nothing to say on that. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for appearing before us, Ms. Thorpe. Your question has been noted.
Will anything be done?
I think that there's a lot of what you say, that you're touching on a lot of areas that are areas of provincial jurisdiction. And I know that there has been a considerable amount of frustration expressed in terms of the response that Lytton is getting from various provincial agencies. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the reason that Lytton is lacking in emergency services right now, but I'm not altogether sure that within the TNRD that we have the capacity or even the authority to address the questions that
No,
that
but
you've been raised, but they will be
are you
taken,
not
but
the
they will be
voice?
taken under consideration.
All right, thank you.
Is there any further questions is there a further question from the audience? None that I can see. So then I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Oh, Director Rice?
No, I'd like to address that since I am the director in question. You know, I'm dealing with a lot of things on my own, not to be an excuse, but I will apologize for not being down to the Resiliency Center, and which I haven't, but I haven't been to a lot of places right now as we've been displaced for a long time, as everybody knows, from the floods and things like that. But I will say I've been pretty vocal, pretty much engaged with the ministry. I've written many emails, sent them off, response, not got response back. I've been a big advocate for Lytton. I haven't been at the Resiliency Center in person, but I don't think they could find a better advocate for Lytton than the job I've done, given the circumstances I am dealing with in not only in my own family, but dealing with the entirety of the disasters, which of course Lytton now in the flooding and stuff like that, which I brought up earlier, there's a lot to deal with. And I'm dealing with it remotely, I think the best I can. And I apologize for not being at the Resiliency Center, but I will continue to do the best job I can do for all my constituents. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved, we stand adjourned.